He won 6 NBA championships. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the greatest basketball player who ever lived. He was beloved, celebrated, and called a legend. But behind the spotlight, behind the trophies, behind the dynasty, Scottie Pippen was living a life that most people never saw. A life full of betrayal, broken trust, hidden rage, and shocking secrets that the NBA never wanted you to know. Tonight, we are pulling back the curtain on the real Scottie Pippen, the man the Chicago Bulls dynasty was built on, the man who was robbed blind by the people he trusted, the man whose personal life became one of the most jaw-dropping soap operas in American sports history. And here is the thing. Every single thing you are about to hear is real, documented, verified. This is not gossip. This is the story they never fully told you. So before you scroll past this, stay with me. Because by the end of this, you're going to see Scottie Pippen in a completely different light. And I promise you, you will not see that coming. Let us start at the very beginning. Because to understand who Scottie Pippen really is, you have to understand where he came from. Scottie Pippen was born in Hamburg, Arkansas, in 1965. He was the youngest of 12 children. Let that sink in, 12 children in one household. His family did not have much. His father worked in a paper mill, and when Scottie was young, his father suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. The family struggled financially, and Scottie grew up watching his parents fight to survive. He was not even a highly recruited basketball player coming out of high school. He attended the University of Central Arkansas, not exactly the breeding ground for NBA superstars. He was so unknown that the university could not afford a full scholarship for him when he arrived, so Scottie Pippen worked as the team equipment manager while also trying out for the basketball team. That is correct. The man who would become a 6-time NBA champion was literally washing uniforms and carrying equipment bags just to get a chance to play college basketball. And here is what makes that story even more extraordinary. He made the team. And not just made it. He became the best player on the roster. By his senior year, NBA scouts were paying attention. The Seattle Supersonics selected Scottie Pippen 5th overall in the 1987 NBA draft and immediately traded him to the Chicago Bulls on draft night. And that is where the story of a lifetime began. The Bulls at that point were a promising team built around a young Michael Jordan. Pippen came in, and right away there was something special about him. His long arms, his court vision, his ability to guard multiple positions. He was unlike anything the league had seen at his size. He could do a little bit of everything. But if you think the path to 6 championships was smooth and glorious, you have already been misled. Because from the very first year Scottie Pippen signed a new contract with the Bulls, the seeds of a decades-long injustice were already being planted. And when this came to light years later, even Michael Jordan himself was shocked by what had happened to his teammate. Think about that for a second. The greatest player in NBA history, a man not exactly known for generosity or empathy, was disturbed by how the Chicago Bulls had treated Scottie Pippen. That alone should tell you everything about how deep this betrayal went. And we are just getting started. In 1991, after 3 seasons with the Bulls and already contributing to their first NBA championship run, Scottie Pippen sat down to negotiate a new contract. Now, you have to understand the context here. The 1991 NBA Finals. The Bulls were about to win their very first championship. Pippen was arguably their second-best player and one of the best defensive players in the entire league. This should have been a moment of maximum negotiating power. But Pippen came from poverty. He had a large family depending on him. His father was paralyzed. His siblings needed support. He could not afford to gamble. So when the Chicago Bulls put a contract in front of him, a 7-year, $18 million deal, Scottie Pippen signed it. He did not wait. He did not push harder. He signed it. And here is what makes that decision haunting. The Bulls owner Jerry Reinsdorf actually told him at the time, and these are nearly his exact words, "You might be selling yourself short." The man handing him the contract warned him that the deal was probably too long and he might regret it. But Pippen signed anyway because the money felt life-changing at that moment. And Reinsdorf, knowing all of that, let him sign it anyway. What happened next is one of the most stunning financial stories in the history of professional sports. The NBA exploded in popularity throughout the 1990s. Michael Jordan became a global icon. The Chicago Bulls became the most recognizable sports franchise on earth. Television deals ballooned. Revenue skyrocketed. Player salaries went through the roof. And Scottie Pippen, the second-best player on the greatest dynasty in basketball history, was watching all of it happen while locked into a contract that was aging worse by the day. By the 1995 to 1996 season, the season the Bulls won a then-record 72 games, Scottie Pippen's salary was ranked 74th in the entire league. The man helping lead the greatest regular season in NBA history was the 74th highest-paid player. By the time the Bulls were in the middle of their second three-peat, in the 1997 to 1998 season, Pippen was not just underpaid compared to Jordan. He was the 6th highest-paid player on his own team. He ranked 122nd in the entire NBA. Michael Jordan's salary that year was $33 million. Scottie Pippen made $2.7 million. Jordan made more than 12 times what Pippen made. And Pippen, according to Phil Jackson, who coached both of them, was arguably the second-best player in the entire world that year. Jackson himself called it embarrassing. And here is the part that truly exposes how deeply unfair this situation was. In the 1994 to 1995 season, Michael Jordan retired for the first time to pursue baseball. The Bulls had no Jordan. And what happened? Scottie Pippen carried that team. He averaged over 22 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists per game. He led the Bulls to the playoffs without Jordan. He was nominated for NBA MVP that year. He was playing at the absolute peak of his powers. He was one of the top 3 players in the league by almost any measure. And his salary? Still locked. Still frozen. Still paying him like a backup point guard on a losing team. He tried to demand a trade. Multiple times. He wanted out. He wanted a fair deal somewhere, anywhere. But the Bulls refused to move him. They knew what they had. They knew that without Pippen, the dynasty was nothing. So they kept him trapped. They held the championship dream over his head and essentially told him, "You can either win rings with us for almost nothing, or you can leave and earn your money somewhere that will never win." That is not loyalty. That is exploitation disguised as opportunity. And the league let it happen. Michael Jordan was aware of all of this. And despite his reputation as someone who was extraordinarily competitive and not always the most compassionate person in the room, Jordan spoke publicly about Pippen's situation in a way that was surprisingly candid. Before the 1995 to 1996 season, Jordan told a Chicago Bulls reporter, and these were his actual words, "I wish there was some way legally that I could give him some of the money he totally deserves as a player. He is totally underpaid." Even Jordan was saying out loud what everyone in the organization knew privately. Scottie Pippen was being stolen from. But knowing it and fixing it were two different things. The Bulls had Pippen under contract. They had no legal or financial obligation to renegotiate. And so they did not. Reinsdorf kept the deal intact. Krause kept building the team around 2 drastically underpaid superstars. And the titles kept coming. 6 of them. And every single championship banner that went up in the United Center was, in some ways, built on the back of a man who was never properly compensated for what he gave. When Pippen finally left the Bulls after that 6th championship in 1998, he signed a 5-year, $67 million deal with the Houston Rockets. The money he deserved finally arrived, but the prime years of his career had already been given away for almost nothing. Now, when the ESPN documentary The Last Dance came out in 2020, it reignited all of this. Pippen watched the documentary, and he was furious. Not just about the contract, but about how the story was told. He felt that Jordan was presented as the singular genius behind everything, while the supporting cast, and especially Pippen, was reduced to props in someone else's highlight reel. Pippen went on record and called the documentary deeply unfair. He described Jordan as condescending in the way he spoke about his teammates. Pippen wrote in his 2021 memoir, Unguarded, that Michael Jordan was, quote, horrible to play with in many respects. He talked about how Jordan's competitive drive sometimes crossed into cruelty, belittling teammates in practice, demanding impossibly high standards while showing limited patience for imperfection. Now, Jordan supporters pushed back hard on this. They said Pippen was bitter, that he was rewriting history to make himself look better. But here is the thing. Pippen was not wrong about the money. That was documented. He was not wrong about being undervalued. That was acknowledged publicly. So when he said the documentary was one-sided, a lot of serious analysts agreed with him. The relationship between Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan, once described as the greatest partnership in basketball history, had become cold, fractured, and deeply complicated. But the contract and the Jordan feud, as explosive as they are not even the most stunning chapters of Scottie Pippen's story. Because off the court, Pippen's personal life was unraveling in ways that were almost impossible to believe. Let us talk about the money first. Scottie Pippen made over $109 million during his NBA career. That is a number that should set a man up for life. His family, his children, his grandchildren, all of it should have been secure. Instead, what happened next is a cautionary tale that should be taught in every financial literacy class in America. Shortly before the end of his NBA career, Pippen was introduced to a financial advisor named Robert Lunn. Lunn had been recommended to Pippen by people around him, people he trusted. Pippen handed over tens of millions of dollars in savings and investments to this man. He trusted him completely. And that trust was weaponized against him in one of the most cold-blooded acts of financial fraud ever committed against a professional athlete. Lunn did not just give Pippen bad advice. He forged Pippen's signature. He authorized loans Pippen never agreed to. He funneled money into investments that had no legitimate purpose. By the time Pippen's accountant discovered what was happening, it was almost too late. The total loss to Scottie Pippen from Robert Lunn's fraud was staggering. Pippen had invested over $17 million with Lunn. And when the dust settled and the lawsuits were filed and the courts sorted through the wreckage, Lunn was sentenced to 3 years in prison. 3 years. For stealing millions from one of the most beloved athletes in American sports history. And how much did Pippen recover from the man who stole from him? $400,000. Out of more than $17 million. That is approximately 2 cents on the dollar. Pippen sued the law firm that had recommended Lunn to him, arguing they had a conflict of interest. The firm had its own partner invested in the same bad real estate deal they pointed Pippen toward. That lawsuit eventually settled as well. But the financial damage was done. The money was gone. And this was not an isolated mistake. Around the same time, Pippen spent $4.3 million on a private Gulfstream jet. Not a new jet, a 25-year-old jet. A jet that, when it was finally delivered, could not even fly. It needed $1 million in additional repairs just to become airworthy. Pippen had spent more than $5 million total on a jet he could never safely take off the ground. The wealth he had sacrificed his prime years to build was evaporating. Between the financial fraud, the bad investments, the legal fees from multiple lawsuits, and the cost of supporting 8 children from 4 different relationships, Scottie Pippen, who earned over $100 million as an NBA player, ended up with an estimated net worth of around $20 million. Now, $20 million is still a significant amount of wealth by any normal measure. But consider the scale of what was lost. Consider that he earned more than $100 million. Consider that he gave his entire prime to a franchise that underpaid him, and then watched the money he did earn get stolen and mismanaged. The math is brutal. And when you factor in that his former teammate Michael Jordan has a net worth in the billions, the gap between what Pippen contributed to that dynasty and what he ultimately walked away with becomes one of the most painful stories in the history of professional sports. But even with all of that, the contract betrayal, the financial devastation, Pippen's personal life in the years after basketball would generate even more headlines, even more drama, and one of the most bizarre relationship stories you have ever heard. Scottie Pippen married Larsa Yonan in 1997. She later became known publicly as Larsa Pippen, a television personality and cast member of The Real Housewives of Miami. Together they had 4 children, Scottie Jr., Preston, Justin, and Sophia. The marriage lasted over 2 decades, which in celebrity terms is practically a lifetime. But in 2016, they separated, and in 2021 their divorce was officially finalized. The end of the marriage was not quiet. It was not clean, and the fallout from it produced one of the most genuinely shocking real-life storylines in modern American pop culture. Shortly after the divorce was finalized, Larsa Pippen began a public relationship. Not with a musician, not with an actor, not with a businessman. She began dating Marcus Jordan. Let that name sink in. Marcus Jordan, the son of Michael Jordan, the son of Scottie Pippen's former teammate, the son of the man Pippen had feuded with openly and publicly, the son of the man who had played alongside Scottie for over a decade and whose shadow Scottie had struggled to escape his entire career. Larsa Pippen was now romantically involved with Michael Jordan's son, and she was 16 years older than him. The internet, the sports world, and everyone who had ever followed the Bulls dynasty lost their minds. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded. Sports talk shows ran the story for days. Former Bulls fans could not believe what they were seeing. People who had grown up watching Jordan and Pippen dominate the NBA together were now watching the ex-wife of one of them date the son of the other. Charles Barkley, who had been close friends with Michael Jordan for decades, went on television and said there were no winners in this situation. He said it was messy. He said he felt bad for both Michael and Scottie. And Michael Jordan himself was asked directly by a TMZ reporter whether he approved of his son's relationship with Larsa Pippen. His response was a laugh followed by a simple no. Now, Marcus Jordan later said his father was joking. He said the family loved Larsa and that they had spent holidays together. But the dynamic was impossible to ignore. Michael Jordan had spent years in a quiet feud with Scottie Pippen over the Last Dance documentary. Pippen had publicly called Jordan condescending. Jordan had seemingly dismissed Pippen's contributions. And now, the ex-wife of one was romantically involved with the son of the other. Truth, as they say, is stranger than fiction. And in the world of Scottie Pippen, the truth was getting stranger by the day. The Larsa and Marcus Jordan relationship would go on to be one of the most discussed celebrity relationships of 2022 and 2023. They appeared on red carpets together. They confirmed their romance on social media. They even co-hosted a podcast called Separation Anxiety. They talked openly about their relationship, their feelings for each other, and the complications that came with the history between their respective families. And through all of it, Scottie Pippen, the man at the center of this bizarre triangle, was largely silent publicly. But privately, people close to him said he was hurt. Not necessarily still in love with Larsa, but wounded by what the situation represented. Because it was not just a romantic story. It was a public reminder of every complicated chapter of his life playing out simultaneously. The man who had been underpaid while his teammate became a billionaire was now watching that same teammate's son date his ex-wife. Every headline about Marcus and Larsa dragged Pippen back into a narrative he had been trying to move beyond. And just when it seemed like the tabloid circus could not get any more dramatic, it did. Because in early 2024, Marcus and Larsa broke up. The relationship that had shocked the world simply ended. Larsa later said on camera that her own children had urged her to get off what she described as a roller coaster. And she did. But the personal drama in Scottie Pippen's life was not limited to the divorce and the Larsa and Marcus situation. In February of 2024, a bombshell legal filing landed in the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois. A woman named Chevette Valentine filed a civil lawsuit against Scottie Pippen, his ex-wife Larsa Pippen, his brother Carl Pippen, and the Chicago Bulls organization. The lawsuit was seeking $250 million in damages. $250 million. And the allegations inside that lawsuit were some of the most serious and disturbing claims ever made against a major American sports figure. Valentine alleged that she had been romantically involved with Scottie Pippen on and off between 1987 and 1993. During part of that time, Pippen was married to his first wife. Valentine said she did not know about that marriage when their relationship began. She described a relationship that was passionate and intense at the start, but ended in a way that she says destroyed her life. And what she alleged happened at the end of that relationship, and in the decades that followed, goes far beyond a simple dispute between two former partners. This was a story of alleged abuse, alleged corruption, alleged conspiracy, and a son who never got to know his father. According to the lawsuit filed by Sidekick Valentine, her relationship with Scottie Pippen ended after she was sexually assaulted by Scottie and his brother Carl. That alleged assault, she claimed, resulted in a pregnancy. She gave birth to a son, a boy who she named Devonte Pippen. Devonte grew up without acknowledgement from Scottie Pippen. He grew up without the support, the attention, or the identity of a father. And then in 2011, Devonte Pippen was murdered. He was killed at the age of roughly 23. A young man who never got to fully know who he was or where he came from gone. Valentine's lawsuit sought child support for Devonte even posthumously, as part of the recognition that he was Scottie Pippen's biological son and had been denied support during his lifetime. But the claims did not stop with the assault and the child. Valentine alleged that after their relationship ended, Scottie Pippen used his celebrity status as a Chicago Bulls player to systematically stalk, harass, and torment her for over 3 decades. 30 years. She alleged that when she attempted to file a police report about the harassment, Pippen used his connections with local, state, and federal employees to have her complaint suppressed. And more disturbingly, she alleged that he used medical connections to falsify records that portrayed her as mentally ill. An attempt, she claimed, to discredit her before she could ever be believed. Valentine's lawsuit stated that the alleged stalking and harassment cost her housing. It cost her employment. It cost her career opportunities. She said that for 30 years, she tried to find justice. And every time she reached out for help, the door was closed. She sent a letter to the Chicago Bulls organization before filing the lawsuit, warning them that she would take legal action if they did not address her case within 30 days. In that letter, she wrote, and these are her words from the filing, "Over the past 30 years and counting, I have endured a series of tormenting acts perpetrated by Scottie Pippen, Carl T. Pippen, and Larsa Pippen, with the Chicago Bulls organization failing to address or rectify the situation. These acts include stalking, harassment, and rape, among others." She accused the Chicago Bulls of showing a blatant disregard for the law and basic human decency. She also noted that this was not the first time she had sought legal remedy. In 2019, Valentine had sued Scottie Pippen in small claims court for the maximum allowed, $9,999. She alleged that during their relationship, Pippen had promised to reimburse her for travel expenses she incurred going to see him play road games. He never paid. The 2019 case was simply about money she said he owed her. The 2024 lawsuit was about something far more profound and far more painful. It is critical to note here, and this is important, these are civil allegations. Sidekick Valentine filed a civil lawsuit, not criminal charges. Scottie Pippen has not been convicted of anything. No criminal trial has taken place in connection with these allegations. Pippen's legal team has not publicly responded in detail to the substance of the claims in the filing, and at the time of this reporting, the lawsuit is part of ongoing civil proceedings. But the severity and specificity of the allegations, spanning decades, involving multiple family members, naming a deceased child, and alleging systemic suppression of her attempts to seek justice, made this one of the most significant and troubling legal stories involving a major American sports figure in recent memory. The combination of the sexual assault allegation, the claim of a secret child who was later murdered, the alleged 30-year harassment campaign, and the claim that institutional power was used to silence her. It is a story that demands to be taken seriously, examined carefully, and not dismissed. Whatever the ultimate legal outcome, the existence of these detailed allegations against a man who was celebrated as one of the greatest champions in basketball history is a reminder that the public image of an athlete and the private truth of their life are not always the same story. Now let us step back from the legal and financial catastrophes and look at something that often gets overlooked in the Scottie Pippen story: the question of his legacy and how the basketball world has treated it. Because here is the thing about being Michael Jordan's teammate: it is both a gift and a curse. The gift is obvious. You win championships. You get rings. Your name is attached to the greatest dynasty in basketball history. Your highlight reel includes some of the most iconic moments in the sport. But the curse is equally powerful. Because no matter what you do, no matter how brilliant you are, no matter how essential you are to the success, the story always returns to Jordan. And when Jordan signed off on a 10-part documentary about himself, and that documentary became a cultural phenomenon watched by tens of millions of people around the world, Scottie Pippen found himself in the worst possible position. He was prominent enough to be featured extensively. But the framing, the editing choices, the emphasis, the moments chosen to define each player, left many people, including Pippen himself, feeling that the documentary told Jordan's story at the expense of everyone else's truth. Pippen felt that the documentary depicted him in moments of weakness and embarrassment while consistently elevating Jordan to an almost mythological status. One of the most specific examples Pippen pointed to was how the documentary handled what became known as the headache game, the 1990 Eastern Conference playoffs against the Detroit Pistons, when Pippen suffered a severe migraine and was unable to play effectively. The documentary showed the moment as a kind of soft-focus embarrassment, Pippen failing when the team needed him. What the documentary did not fully explore was the context. Pippen was dealing with a genuine medical emergency. He had not yet developed the mental and physical toughness that would define his later career. He was a young player in one of the most punishing playoff environments the NBA had ever seen. But in The Last Dance's telling, it became a character study in weakness. Pippen wrote about this in his memoir. He felt that Jordan's hands were all over the documentary's framing, that Jordan had essentially approved a version of history in which Jordan was always the hero and everyone else was always the limitation. Whether that is entirely fair to Jordan or not is debatable. But what is clear is that the documentary reopened wounds that Pippen had carried quietly for decades. And when you already feel that a franchise robbed you of your prime earning years, and your financial advisor stole your savings, and your ex-wife is now dating your former teammate's son, and then a global television event seems to rewrite your own legacy without your control, it is not hard to understand why Pippen came out swinging. The memoir Pippen published in 2021 was titled Unguarded, and the title was not subtle. It was Pippen removing the armor. It was him saying, for the first time in a sustained public way, what he actually felt and believed about his career, his teammates, his franchise, and his legacy. Some of the things he wrote were admired for their honesty. Others were considered unfair by Jordan's supporters. But the most powerful sections of the book were about the contract situation, about how the Bulls had manipulated him when he was young and vulnerable and came from poverty and needed money for his family. He described the feeling of watching Jordan's salary dwarf his own while he played just as hard, contributed just as much to the wins, and sacrificed his body night after night for a paycheck that insulted his value. He talked about the bitterness of watching role players on losing teams earn more than him while he was arguably the best two-way player in the world. And he talked about what it felt like to be told, in essence, to be grateful, to be told that the rings, the glory, the legacy should be payment enough for the financial shortfall the franchise had imposed on him. Pippen rejected that framing completely. He said championships do not pay your mortgage. Championships do not take care of your children. Championships do not compensate you for the trust you placed in a franchise that placed so little trust in your future. And here is a fact about Scottie Pippen that even many casual fans do not fully appreciate. His career statistics, when looked at honestly and without the Jordan comparison distorting the lens, are extraordinary. Over 17 seasons, Pippen averaged 18 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 steals per game. He was a 7-time NBA All-Star. He was named to the NBA All-Defensive First Team 8 times. 8 times. He was selected as one of the 50 greatest players in NBA history in 1996, and then was also named one of the 75 greatest players in NBA history when the league expanded that list in 2021. He won 2 Olympic gold medals representing the United States in 1992 and 1996. He was at his peak, the defensive anchor of a dynasty. He guarded the best player on the opposing team almost every night. He took those assignments personally. He made it his identity. And yet, for most of his career, he was compensated like a secondary contributor on a middling team. The gap between his actual contribution and his actual compensation remains one of the most glaring examples of labor exploitation in professional sports history. There is also a side of Scottie Pippen's personal life that reveals a man who was generous almost to a fault, and who paid an enormous personal and financial price for that generosity. Pippen has 8 children from 4 different relationships. He has always been vocal about his commitment to supporting those children. But the financial weight of child support across multiple relationships, combined with the fraud losses and the bad investments, created a cash flow problem that someone who earned over $100 million simply should not have had. That is the cruel math of financial mismanagement at scale. When you earn large amounts of money quickly, as professional athletes do, the temptation to spend and invest at the same pace as you earn is almost irresistible. And the people around you, the financial advisors, the lawyers, the business partners, often have more interest in accessing your wealth than protecting it. Pippen was not unique in this experience. Dozens of professional athletes have lost fortunes to fraud, to bad advice, to excessive spending. But the size of what Pippen lost relative to what he earned, and the fact that so much of it stemmed from someone he was referred to by people he trusted, makes his story particularly devastating. He did not lose his money through recklessness. He lost it through trust. And that distinction matters enormously. In the years following The Last Dance, Pippen became something of a media figure himself. He gave interviews. He appeared on podcasts. He pushed back on the documentary's framing publicly and persistently. He was not going quietly into retirement. He wanted the record corrected. And in some ways, the reaction to his advocacy for himself was telling. Critics said he was bitter. They said he was trying to tear down Jordan's legacy. They said he should be grateful for the rings and move on. But what those critics seemed unable to grapple with was the underlying reality. A man had been systematically underpaid for his labor, had his life savings stolen from him, had his story told in a way he felt was dishonest, and was now being told to smile and be thankful. When any other worker in any other industry complains about wage theft or labor exploitation, we generally take it seriously. When a retired basketball player says the same thing, using different words but making the same essential argument, suddenly he is labeled ungrateful and difficult. The double standard is significant, and Pippen, to his credit, refused to accept it. He kept talking. He kept pushing. He was not going to let the version of history that erased his contributions become the permanent record. By late 2024, Scottie Pippen's social media presence had become something of a cultural curiosity. He posted regularly on X, formerly Twitter, engaging with fans and sometimes generating significant controversy. In December of 2024, he posted an AI-generated image of Elon Musk wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey with the caption, "How many championships would we have won with Elon Musk?" The post was meant as a lighthearted joke. It did not land that way. The internet immediately turned it into a referendum on every uncomfortable chapter of Pippen's personal life. Commenters brought up Larsa. They brought up the rapper Future, who had briefly been romantically linked to Larsa after the divorce. They brought up Marcus Jordan. They made jokes about Pippen's failed investments. They revisited the contract situation. One simple playful post had unleashed every sharp edge in Pippen's public story. And rather than ignore it, Pippen responded with surprising good humor, tweeting that he found the comments funny and was going to follow his favorite ones. It was a moment that humanized him in an unexpected way. A man who had every reason to be defensive chose to laugh. But the fact that a single harmless tweet instantly activated years of accumulated public mockery told you something important. Scottie Pippen exists in the public imagination as a man defined more by what went wrong than by what went right. That is a profound injustice when you consider what actually went right. 6 championships. 6. There are only a handful of players in the entire history of professional basketball who can say that. And Pippen was not a passenger on those championship teams. He was the engine. He was the defensive backbone. He was the player who took the toughest assignment night after night. He was the one who had to carry the team in the seasons when Jordan was distracted or retired. He was the one who sacrificed his scoring average to maximize Jordan's. He was the one who extended possessions with his passing, ended opponent possessions with his defense, and set the physical tone of every game with his intensity. Phil Jackson, who coached both Jordan and Pippen, and who is considered one of the greatest coaches in the history of American team sports, has been unambiguous in his assessments. Jackson has said repeatedly that Pippen was the most complete basketball player he ever coached. Not Jordan. Pippen. The most complete. That is a significant statement. And it is a statement that the broader basketball public has largely failed to absorb because the Jordan mythology is so powerful, so pervasive, and so commercially motivated that any competing truth struggles to find equal footing. Let us talk about the emotional dimension of Scottie Pippen's story, because it is easy to get lost in the statistics and the lawsuits and the financial numbers and forget that at the center of all of it is a human being. A man who grew up without much. A man who worked as an equipment manager just to get the chance to play college basketball. A man who came from a family of 12 children, who had a paralyzed father, who felt the weight of everyone depending on him when he signed that first bad contract. A man who trusted people who betrayed him. A man who built a 24-year marriage and then watched it dissolve into one of the most publicly bizarre breakup stories in sports history. A man who wrote a book to try to tell his truth and was mocked for doing so. A man who achieved things that very few humans in the history of the sport have ever achieved, and still found himself fighting, decades later, to be seen clearly for who he was and what he did. That is not bitterness. That is the human cost of living in someone else's shadow for your entire professional life, and then discovering that the shadow followed you into retirement. Scottie Pippen's emotional journey is one of the most complex and underexplored stories in American sports, and it deserves to be understood, not reduced. There is one more chapter of Scottie Pippen's family life that rarely gets discussed in full, and it involves his eldest son. Before his marriage to Larsa, Pippen had a son named Antron Pippen. Antron was born in 1987, Pippen's draft year, with a different woman. Antron suffered from asthma his entire life. He pursued basketball like his father, playing at the college level, but his health struggles were a constant barrier. Antron Pippen died in April 2021. He was 33 years old. Scottie Pippen lost his son. He lost him to chronic asthma complications. And the grief of that loss, a son born the same year his father was drafted into the NBA, a son who tried to follow his father's path, a son who could not overcome the physical challenges that his own body presented, was a private devastation that played out alongside all of the very public controversies of that same period. The memoir, the Jordan feud, the divorce, the Larsa and Marcus situation, all of that happened while Pippen was also grieving a child. That context should not be forgotten. Whatever you think of his public statements, whatever conclusions you draw from the lawsuits and the financial decisions and the social media posts, Scottie Pippen went through one of the worst experiences a parent can endure. He buried his son. And he did it quietly, while the rest of the world watched everything else. When you look at the full sweep of Scottie Pippen's life, from Hamburg, Arkansas, to the Chicago Bulls dynasty, from the worst contract in basketball history to the loss of millions to fraud, from a decades-long marriage ending in one of the most shocking post-divorce storylines in celebrity history, to a $250 million civil lawsuit, to the death of his eldest son, what you are looking at is a life of extraordinary extremes. Extreme achievement, extreme injustice, extreme personal drama, extreme grief. He is not a simple figure. He never was. The version of Scottie Pippen that most people carry in their heads, the loyal sidekick, the perfect teammate, the gracious championship winner, was always incomplete. It was the curated version. The version that served the Bulls' marketing department, that served the Jordan documentary, that served the comfortable narrative of a golden dynasty built on two best friends who trusted each other completely. The real Scottie Pippen is infinitely more interesting, infinitely more complicated, and his story, told fully and honestly, says more about the price of athletic greatness in America than almost any other story you could tell. Let us now turn to something that many people have not fully considered: how Scottie Pippen's situation compares to other great second bananas in sports history. Because there is a long tradition in American team sports of the number 2 player being systematically undervalued. Think about Scottie Pippen alongside Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant's complicated partnership. Think about him alongside Dwayne Wade and LeBron James in Miami. Think about him alongside all of the great wingmen, the great defensive anchors, the great supporting leads who made the star player's brilliance possible. In almost every case, the player in Pippen's position, indispensable but not the primary narrative engine, ends up with a legacy that is perpetually qualified. He is described as great for a number 2, incredible for someone in his role, but rarely just great, rarely just incredible without the qualifying phrase attached. Pippen spent his entire career fighting that qualifier and never fully escaped it, and he knew it, which is part of why the documentary hit him so hard. It was not just about how he was shown in specific moments. It was about the entire framing, a framing that reduced him to a supporting character in a story he experienced as a co-lead. That fight over narrative is, in some ways, the defining struggle of Scottie Pippen's public life. Something else that rarely gets examined is the physical sacrifice Scottie Pippen made for those championships. In the 1998 NBA Finals, the last dance, the 6th championship, the final one, Pippen played through severe back pain. Not mild discomfort. Not something he could manage with some ibuprofen and ice. He had a serious back injury that required surgery. But the Bulls were so close to their 6th title, and Pippen so committed to the team, that he delayed the surgery and played. He played hurt. He played through pain that would have ended most players' seasons. He played because that is what Scottie Pippen did. He showed up. He competed. He sacrificed his body for a franchise that was already paying him a fraction of what he was worth. And when the summer came and the dynasty officially ended, the Bulls traded him away. Jordan retired. Phil Jackson left. And Scottie Pippen, the man who had delayed surgery to finish the championship run, was shipped off to Houston for a fresh contract start that finally reflected his actual value. The surgery happened. The recovery took time. And the Bulls, who had benefited from years of his loyalty and his physical sacrifice, moved on without a second thought. That is the relationship between athlete and institution at its most transactional. And it tells you something important about the actual emotional content of those 6 championship banners. By the time Pippen published his memoir in 2021 and went on the promotional circuit, the response from the sports media establishment was revealing. Some journalists and analysts engaged seriously with his arguments and acknowledged that the contract situation was genuinely unjust. But a significant portion of the reaction was dismissive, characterized by the familiar refrain that Pippen should count his rings and his blessings and stop complaining. One of the most frustrating aspects of that reaction is how it mirrors the way that complaints about labor exploitation are often handled in broader American culture. The message to the worker is consistently, "You got paid, you should be grateful, stop making trouble." That the pay was systematically below the market rate for the value delivered, that was acceptable. That the worker leveraged his loyalty and his championship dreams into accepting below-market compensation, that was also somehow acceptable. But the worker speaking out about it afterward, that was ungrateful. That was difficult. That was problematic. Scottie Pippen's story exposes the way that professional sports have historically conditioned athletes to accept exploitation in exchange for opportunity, and then condition the public to view any athlete who protests that exploitation as someone with a character problem. Now, let us be honest about some things. Scottie Pippen is not without complexity or contradiction. The allegations in the Chevette Valentine lawsuit, if true, would represent serious moral failures that go far beyond any contractual or financial dispute. The lawsuit describes a pattern of alleged behavior over 3 decades that, if proven, would be deeply troubling. These are serious, adult human beings making serious claims, and they deserve to be evaluated seriously. Not dismissed because the person accused is a sports legend, and not treated as proven fact before the legal process has concluded. Pippen has not been found liable in that case. The lawsuit is civil, not criminal. But the existence of such detailed and specific allegations, including the claim of a secret son who was later murdered, and the claim of a decades-long effort to suppress and discredit the plaintiff means that any honest accounting of Scottie Pippen's life has to include this chapter. It is not possible to tell the complete story without it, and telling incomplete stories about complicated people is exactly the kind of thing that The Last Dance was criticized for doing. Intellectual honesty demands that we apply the same standard regardless of which direction the discomfort runs. What does Scottie Pippen represent today, in 2024 and 2025, as a cultural figure? He represents several things simultaneously. He is the living proof that you can be one of the greatest players in the history of a sport and still be chronically undervalued during your prime. He is the cautionary tale about what happens when young athletes from impoverished backgrounds are not given adequate protection and guidance when signing life-defining contracts. He is the example of what financial fraud can do to wealth that was supposed to be generational. He is the public figure whose personal life became a tabloid spectacle in the years after his playing career, adding layers of complexity and controversy to an already complicated legacy. And he is the man who refused to accept the curated version of his own story, who wrote the book, gave the interviews, pushed back against the documentary, and insisted on his right to tell his own truth. That last part matters enormously, because the ability to tell your own story, to have your own narrative respected and heard, is something that professional sports organizations have historically denied to athletes. The team tells the story. The league tells the story. The documentary filmmaker tells the story. And the athlete is expected to nod along and be grateful for the exposure. Scottie Pippen refused, and for that, he has been criticized. But for that same reason, he deserves a measure of respect. The Chicago Bulls dynasty of the 1990s is often spoken of with a kind of reverence that borders on mythology. And in many ways it deserves that reverence. What that team accomplished, 6 championships in 8 years, with 2 three-peats separated by Jordan's first retirement, is genuinely unprecedented in the modern NBA era. The competition was fierce. The Eastern Conference in that period included the Detroit Pistons, the New York Knicks, the Indiana Pacers, the Miami Heat, all of them tough, physical, defensively elite teams. Getting through them year after year required something extraordinary. And that something extraordinary had 2 names at its core, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. You cannot separate them in a legitimate historical analysis. You cannot say Jordan did it, and Pippen helped. It is not accurate. The 1993 to 1994 season, when Jordan was playing baseball, proved definitively what the Bulls were without him. A very good team led by Pippen that made the playoffs, but could not get to the finals. And the Jordan-era Bulls before Pippen, before Scottie arrived and transformed the team's defensive identity, were a team that Jordan carried, but that could not win when it mattered. Both men were necessary. Both men were essential. The history cannot be written any other way. And yet, and this is the persistent paradox, Michael Jordan's name generates billions of dollars today through Jordan Brand, through ownership stakes, through media deals, through the enduring mythology of his greatness. The Air Jordan sneaker line alone generates over $5 billion per year for Nike. $5 billion annually. Scottie Pippen's net worth sits at an estimated $20 million. That gap, between the commercial legacy of the partnership and the individual economic outcomes, is one of the starkest illustrations of how unequally value is distributed even when contribution is roughly equal. Now, some of that gap is attributable to Jordan's singular global appeal, to the marketing genius of Nike and his own brand team, to the decisions Jordan made in his post-playing career. Pippen did not build the same off-court empire. That is true. But the baseline, the financial starting point from which both men began building their post-NBA lives, was deliberately designed to be unequal while they were still playing. Jordan was paid what the market demanded. Pippen was paid what a desperate young man from Arkansas agreed to in 1991 when he needed money for his family. That is not the same thing as 2 men making equal opportunities from unequal choices. One of the most underreported aspects of Pippen's story is how it connects to a broader pattern in professional sports. The pattern of franchises exploiting young athletes from economically disadvantaged backgrounds by locking them into long-term contracts before they fully understand their market value or their negotiating leverage. This is not unique to Scottie Pippen. It happened to countless players before him and has continued to happen to countless players after him. The NBA has made significant reforms over the years. Rookie-scale contracts, maximum salaries, player empowerment movements, stronger union representation that have partially addressed these dynamics. But the fundamental tension between team interests and player interests remains. Teams want cost certainty and control. Players want fair compensation and freedom. And when a player comes from poverty and signs a contract while feeling the pressure of his family's needs, as Pippen explicitly described, the scales tilt toward the team in ways that do not reflect the player's actual value. Pippen's story should be part of any serious conversation about labor rights in professional sports. Not as a historical curiosity, but as an instructive example of what happens when a system prioritizes institutional interests over individual fairness. Now, in recent years, Pippen has made some moves to generate income and keep his name in the cultural conversation. He launched a bourbon brand called Digits Bourbon in 2021. He has engaged with the cryptocurrency world, promoting his own crypto-adjacent projects on social media, which, as we mentioned, generated some controversy when fans felt he was using AI-generated images of his own championship memories to promote those ventures. He appeared at celebrity events. He participated in media projects. He explored the documentary space, reportedly working on a project about the 1990 to 1991 Chicago Bulls season. He auctioned off pieces of his memorabilia collection, including items from Michael Jordan's playing days that Pippen had collected over the years. And he remained a public presence, commenting on basketball, on the NBA, on cultural events, with the kind of directness and unfiltered honesty that has defined his post-playing career public persona. Some of it landed well. Some of it generated mockery. But through all of it, Pippen continued to be himself, complicated, outspoken, unwilling to simply perform gratitude and disappear. There is something important that the casual sports fan often misses about the Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen dynamic, and it has to do with who carried whom in specific moments. Jordan is rightly celebrated for the iconic shots, the iconic moments, the game-winning performances that defined his legacy. But in the early years of the Bulls dynasty, before Jordan had fully developed the supporting cast around him that would eventually become a juggernaut, it was Scottie Pippen who held the team together on nights when Jordan was neutralized or struggling. It was Pippen who guarded Isaiah Thomas in the brutal Detroit Pistons playoff series. It was Pippen who was expected to guard Magic Johnson, Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley, the very best offensive players in the league, night after relentless night. It was Pippen who anchored the Bulls' defense to a degree that made Jordan's offensive freedom possible. Jordan's offensive genius was always the rocket fuel, but Pippen's defensive intensity was the engine that kept the machine from blowing up. Take away Pippen's defense and the Jordan-era Bulls score more and give up more. The championships become significantly less certain. That is not speculation. That is the testimony of coaches, analysts, and opponents who lived through those battles. As we move toward the end of this story, I want to bring you back to something fundamental: the question of what we owe great athletes in terms of honest remembrance. Scottie Pippen has been many things in his life. He has been a champion. He has been a labor exploitation victim. He has been a fraud victim. He has been a controversial public figure. He has been a grieving father. He has been a tabloid subject. He has been a whistleblower against the comfortable mythology of his own dynasty. He has been imperfect and human and flawed in ways that are both understandable and in some cases deeply troubling. But what he has never been, and what his supporters argue he has never been given full credit for being, is simply one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived. His Hall of Fame induction in 2010 was deserved and overdue. His 2 Olympic gold medals represent some of the most dominant international basketball ever played by an American team. His 8 all-defensive first-team selections speak to a defensive mastery that few players in the history of the game have matched. And his 6 championship rings speak for themselves, not as inherited trophies, not as participation awards, but as the earned result of an extraordinary athletic career. The feud between Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen that has simmered since The Last Dance documentary shows no signs of fully resolving. As recently as 2025, reports indicated that the two men still had not reconciled. Former Bulls teammate Bill Cartwright described the ongoing tension between them as nonsense, saying publicly that 2 men who had accomplished so much together should find a way to honor what they built rather than allow a documentary to be the final word on their relationship. But documentaries have a way of calcifying narratives. And once tens of millions of people have watched a version of a story, that version becomes the dominant cultural reality, regardless of how many books are written or interviews given to challenge it. The work of correcting the record is always harder than the work of making the original impression. Pippen knows this. It is part of why he has been so persistent. Every interview, every social media post, every public statement is a small brick in the counter-narrative he is trying to build. The narrative that says Scottie Pippen was not a sidekick, not a prop, not a grateful second banana. He was a co-architect of one of the greatest sports dynasties in American history, and he deserves to be remembered as such. It is worth noting, too, that the Larsa Pippen and Marcus Jordan story has an epilogue that is almost poetically appropriate. Their relationship, which had captured so much public attention, ended definitively in 2024. Larsa later said on camera that her own children, her and Scottie's children, had urged her to end it. She said they felt the relationship was unhealthy and unstable, and she listened. The relationship that had seemed designed to provoke every complicated emotion in the Pippen-Jordan dynamic was over. Both Marcus and Larsa moved on. Michael Jordan presumably exhaled, and Scottie Pippen, who had watched the entire thing unfold from a distance, remained focused on his own path forward. The fact that it was Pippen's own children, the children he and Larsa raised together, who effectively ended the most bizarre chapter of the post-divorce drama, says something quietly powerful. Whatever the complications between their parents, those kids knew what they needed. And their mother, to her credit, listened to them. What does Scottie Pippen's story teach us about sports, about money, about loyalty, about celebrity, about the price of greatness? It teaches us that winning does not always mean thriving. It teaches us that fame and financial security are not the same thing, and that the gap between them can be devastating when the people managing your finances betray your trust. It teaches us that the institutions we attach ourselves to, the teams, the franchises, the documentary makers, the brands, have their own interests, and those interests do not always align with the athlete's dignity or the historical truth. It teaches us that the public narrative about a person's life is almost never the complete story, and that the gap between the public narrative and the private truth can be enormous. It teaches us that athletes from disadvantaged backgrounds who make it to the pinnacle of their sport carry baggage and vulnerabilities that are exploited by the systems around them. And it teaches us that a man who refuses to be silent, who insists on telling his version of events, who pushes back against convenient myths, who writes books and gives interviews and posts on social media and keeps fighting for his legacy, is not necessarily bitter or difficult. Sometimes he is just honest. Sometimes he is just brave. And sometimes, telling the truth is the most athletic thing you can do. Today, Scottie Pippen is in his late 50s. He is a grandfather. He is a businessman. He is a public figure who occasionally generates headlines, sometimes for basketball, sometimes for social media, sometimes for the ongoing legal and personal sagas that have defined his post-playing life. He is working, by all accounts, to rebuild and stabilize his financial situation after the losses of the fraud era. He is engaged with his family and his children. His son Scottie Pippen Jr. plays in the NBA for the Memphis Grizzlies, carrying the Pippen name into a new generation with genuine talent and determination. And Scottie Pippen himself remains, whatever else you think of him, a man still in motion. He has not disappeared. He has not retreated into comfortable silence. He remains an active participant in the ongoing conversation about basketball history, about labor and fairness, about legacy and memory. He is still fighting, not for championships anymore, those are won, but for something arguably more elusive, the right to be seen fully and clearly for who he actually is. Not as Jordan's sidekick, not as the cautionary financial tale, not as the tabloid soap opera protagonist, but as Scottie Pippen, one of the most gifted, most complex, most consequential basketball players in the history of the sport. So the next time someone brings up Michael Jordan's 6 championships, remember the man standing next to him. The man who guarded the best scorer on the other team every single night. The man who signed the worst contract in basketball history not because he was naive, but because he was a kid from Arkansas who needed to take care of his family and could not afford to gamble. The man who had his life savings stolen by the people he trusted. The man who fought publicly for his legacy while privately grieving a lost son. The man who watched his ex-wife date his former teammate's son and chose to keep moving forward anyway. The man who wrote the book they told him not to write, who gave the interviews they told him not to give, who refused to accept the curated story of his own life. Scottie Pippen is complicated. He is contradictory. He carries burdens that are entirely of his own making and burdens that were placed on him by a system that was never designed to protect him. But he is not a sidekick. He was never a sidekick. He was a champion, in every sense of that word, who deserved more than he was given and who has spent the second half of his life insisting on that truth. Whether or not the world ultimately accepts it, that insistence itself is something. That refusal to disappear quietly is something. And the full, complicated, devastating, triumphant, still unfinished story of Scottie Maurice Pippen is something the world is finally, maybe, beginning to understand.